Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Energy Quick Chat, where we rub minds with stakeholders and players in the energy market. Now, the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Invest in Women and Accelerate Progress. And this connects strongly to the energy sector in a lot of ways, be it oil, gas, mining, or renewables. While we have seen a growth in women participation in the energy sector, it is still not enough. So today we'll be focusing on the role of women in Africa's sustainable energy future. And joining me to discuss this are two powerful women in the energy sector and very powerful voices shaping the trajectory of the industry in their spheres. Amena Baker is an award-winning journalist, an OPEC correspondent and senior research analyst at Energy Intelligence, while Dr. Victoria Nanule wears various hats. She is a lawyer, renowned energy and mining expert, and has broad expertise in the extractive industries, governance, and regulations. She is also a natural resources law lecturer and at the University of Bradford, UK. Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining us here on Energy Frontiers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Right, I'm going to start with Amena. And Amena, OPEC, the IEA, has always been dominated by the male figures. Are we looking to see any women participation, or maybe you coming up as a woman in the energy sector or heading one of these parastatals? Maybe you.
I think traditionally the oil and gas sector is mainly dominated or was dominated by men, just given the nature of the sector and the work involved. When you're talking about oil and gas, traditionally that meant going into the fields, working on offshore rigs, facing all the hardships, and all of these did not really bode well with being a woman. And therefore, traditionally, you would see a lot of male domination in the sector. Now let's fast forward 2024. Now we are seeing more women joining the sector in various fields, as well as I mentioned on the field, and I'm seeing more and more women now actually being on-field engineers. But on an executive level, you're seeing more women at OPEC. You're seeing more women covering OPEC, whether it's in the research sector or in the media, but there's definitely more room for women to take part in this very important part, because oil and gas, regardless of the pace of the transition, I really am a strong believer that oil and gas will remain relevant for decades to come. So it's important to be a more inclusive sector and see more women join.
Right. So I would also, you have mentioned something very crucial, and I would like to circle back to Dr. Victoria. When we look at the issue of artisanal mining, you have covered extensively on this area. How can we address and eradicate the issue of artisanal mining among young African girls and women at the same time?
Thank you very much for that question. And that's a very important question, because with artisanal mining, you also have to think about the issues of critical minerals. Some of these miners are involved in the mining of critical minerals, which is very key for the energy transition, like cobalt and copper. So to answer that question briefly, you cannot eradicate women from artisanal mining, because the ASM sector employs lots of people, host communities, and most of these host communities, you'll find that many women are involved in the sector. But rather, I think we should focus on how to empower these women who are involved in artisanal mining to be able to have the financial capacity, the technical capacity to also own mines. So how can we uplift them from just being artisanal miners to a strong person in the mining sector? And that would require a lot of capacity building, expertise, education, but most importantly, it would require us to ensure that these women have access to the finances. Because in most cases, if you look at artisanal mining, it's the men or the male who are dominating it, even financially. They're the ones who are owning the mines, and the women are just there doing small work and being paid little for their work. So we need to empower them financially, and also we have to empower them technically to ensure that they also rise up to the top when it comes to the mining sector.
Okay, so I would like to ask now, speaking to women's capabilities, Amena, what are some of the preconceived notions about women's capabilities and leadership styles that have hindered their advancement in the oil and gas sector? And I'll give you a bit of context to that. We had there was a time we had the Angolan minister, the oil minister, who had issues, embezzlement problems and all of that. Then we had Desiani as well from Nigeria. So it looks like a bit of an issue when it comes to trusting women with setting this kind of leadership roles. But are there preconceived notions from other angles about women's capabilities when it comes to handling this sector?
Yeah, I would say just in general, and this is not specific just to the oil and gas industry, this is just women in the workforce. There are still stereotypes that you see in the East, but also in the West about women. I think women still pay a very high price for balancing the roles of being a mother, of being in the workforce. There is also this notion that the woman should always prioritize the family, take care of the kids. If you are too ambitious, if you are career driven, you get criticized. There are also criticism about management styles. If a man does something one way, he gets praised. But if a woman does the exact same action, they say, okay, she's a micromanager, she's dominating, you get these negative connotations to the same action. So this is just in general, I think, for women in all sectors and not just in oil and gas. And you mentioned these two examples of ministers that were from African states. Unfortunately, and I don't think this is gender related again, but sometimes when women get into, some women get into positions of power, and whatever happens, you mentioned corruption, it brings stigma to every other woman. That doesn't necessarily happen with men, but it happens with women. So we need to kind of break that. Not everyone is the same. And what I really want to bring focus on is something that I saw in the ground, and being based here in the Gulf region, is the kind of social revolution which is happening in Saudi Arabia. Having these women come out into the workforce in massive number, get educated, and it's really based on meritocracy. It's no longer about gender or having allocations for women, but I'm seeing this change very, very positive. 10-15 years ago, when I used to go into the Saudi ministry, perhaps there were 4 women. They were locked in a room. There were no bathrooms for women in the entire ministry. Now there are hundreds of women, and they're running the show. They're all very young, educated, ambitious, very impressive. And I think that's an example that we can learn from in many regions.
Right. Right. So I would like to bring it to the mining sector. And Victoria, why is it difficult for women in mining to participate at top scale in energy decision-making processes? And how can these issues be addressed?
All right. So the mining sector, traditionally, it's a male-dominated sector. But besides being male-dominated, it's also capital-intensive, and it requires a lot of technical expertise. So traditionally, or even historically, those were some of the obstacles for women to be involved in the mining sector. But however, in recent years, that is changing, because you're seeing lots of women being ministers of energy and mining in different countries. In Uganda, the current minister is a woman. And then women are leading mining companies, they're CEOs. Myself, I'm a CEO at Name Energy, which is also a consulting firm in energy and mining. So there are those obstacles that were traditional obstacles that are now being overcome because of the education. Most of the women are educated and also access to opportunities. But however, this doesn't mean that the problem has been solved because it's just a minority of these women who are in the top positions. So there is still room for more women to be involved in these activities because initially it was thought that mining is more of a male thing. It's a male dominated thing. It's a male job. But right now, I think different women have shown that even a woman can rise up to be a CEO. They can set up companies. They can lead ministries. So it's really open for the young girls to be inspired and also to be educated about the mining sector and for them to know that there are opportunities out there for them to take part in.
Right. While we were discussing, we had Mrs. Grace Orife joining us. Mrs. Grace Orife is a seasoned energy economist and strategist. She's also the Chief Executive Officer of Adela Energy Limited and co-chair of the African Women Business Energy Network, initiative of the African Energy Chamber, where she's also an advisory board member. Thank you for joining us, Grace.
Thank you.
Right. Welcome. So I was just speaking to Victoria here, and she was talking to me about how we can. She spoke about why it is difficult for women in mining to participate at top scale levels in energy decision making processes. And I wanted to bring it back to you because you just came in and ask you about. As an African female entrepreneur, what are some specific challenges you have faced with regards to access to funding and resources to help you scale in your business?
Yeah, when we look at funding and other resources as a female or as a woman operating in an industry where capital is quite capital intensive, especially when you're in the upstream business, that's where I am. It's quite capital intensive. As a woman, in terms of raising funds, the knowledge, usually there's a gap in terms of knowledge. The question is, where do I start? Or where do I get the money from? Who do I talk to? So if we have more, I can see some financial institutions have women specific grants, funding, but not all. But most of us women, we are not aware of such. So the more we get aware of, the better, because raising funds is actually very difficult. Starting as an entrepreneur, especially in Africa, it's quite hard. And we need to be trained to know where and how to access the funds. I think there's a gap as well in terms of training.
Okay, so now that would make me ask you another question. So what can be done to fast track investment for small and women-led businesses in order to help them scale at large?
I would say to establish dedicated funds for women. It's easier for women to tackle that. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some institutions that are already doing that. I would say, for example, in Nigeria, the NCDMD, they have a petty grant for women-owned businesses in Nigeria. That's actually promoting women. So you can actually assess that. I think what some women may not know, what is important is the awareness that there's such a grant that exists somewhere for women to actually access. Like also offer capacity building programs. So women, I mentioned the lack of understanding the requirements, what does it take to actually raise funds. We need to be offered that training as well, and to also provide training and mentorship and technical assistance for women to enhance our skills to understand what it takes to raise funds. Then I will also say partnership. I talked about collaboration among women. Even if you don't go into partnership among women, you can also do that with men as well because they are stronger, right?
Thank you, Grace. I would like to ask Amena right now, do you see you've been in the oil and gas space for a while now, and you have done well, I must say, for yourself. But do you see more women emerging in the oil and gas space? Particularly, of course, we know that over time there has been a rise, but of course it's not still enough. But in involvement in bringing innovative and out-of-the-box solutions to critical energy challenges, do you see more women emerging in this space, and what does the future look like?
Yeah, I see more women, but you're absolutely right in saying that it's not enough. I mean, last year, for example, at our Energy Intelligence Forum in London, we awarded Vicky Hollop, the CEO of Oxy, as Best Executive of the Year. And it was really refreshing. She was the first female executive to ever win that award since we had our conference decades ago. So it was really refreshing to see that a woman reach that position. And I'm a big believer, again, in meritocracy. I don't like, whenever we have sessions, for example, at conferences about the women in energy, I think that's very cliche. We should just, focus on our skill, our education. It's great if our organizations and our governments support us, have special programs to help promote our skills, because women have been left behind in many industries, not just oil and gas, for many, many decades. So we deserve this kind of push or help. But at the end of the day, I want us to see eye to eye. I want people to, look beyond gender and just look at the skills, the passion that we have, and what we have to offer. And for my just experience as, being Egyptian, I can tell you, at least in the media sector, covering everything from politics to oil and gas to finance, women tend to have something more to prove. They work harder, and all the seniors that I've worked, my superiors and bosses, always said that we prefer to hire women compared to men because of that drive.
That's impressive. So I would like to also push the same question back to Dr. Victoria. What role do you see African women playing in shaping the future of the extractive industry to ensure an equitable, orderly, and just transition for all? Of course, we are in the face of where everybody's pushing for a just energy transition. So what role do you see African women playing to shape this trajectory?
Yeah, so women do have a major role to play, because when you're talking about a just transition, the question would be, what does justice mean? And justice is not just about the various stakeholders, but it's also ensuring that the host communities, the people in the communities where the extractives are, where the resources are, can also see justice. For a very long time, on the African continent, we have seen that many countries that are actually rich with energy resources and mineral resources are the poorest. So with this just transition, you cannot just transition from one energy use to another without first addressing the pertinent challenges in the way you've been managing the resources. So the justice should be how a community is benefiting. And women have a greater role to play, because if you look at these communities, they're mostly rural communities where the resources are, and they're the poorest. And it's the women who are involved in the upbringing of their families and everything. So justice should start at ensuring that the communities are well taken care of. There is developmental infrastructure in the areas where the resources are. The other issues that really impede women would be the financial issues and maybe the technical issues, which governments and other stakeholders now can come in to ensure that they are empowered financially to ensure that they have a level playing field when it comes to the development of the energy sector, and also when it comes to transitioning to a low carbon economy in a just way.
Thank you so much. You mentioned something very important about women being disproportionately more affected by all of this. And I wanted to ask Grace about this. Women are said to be disproportionately affected by lack of clean cooking. We can't separate this from all of this conversation. How can renewable energy, there's been a push for renewable energy. And of course, you are in Nigeria. We're all in Nigeria. We are both in Nigeria, and we can see how this affects us negatively. We have the issue of power generation, which is very at low scale. How can renewable energy help to solve the problem of children and women mortality in Africa?
Yeah, there are some areas, especially, you say Nigeria. I extend it out of Nigeria. I know there are some areas in Nigeria where electricity, you don't have power, and you can go for days and months without power, right? I'll speak on other African countries as well. Nigeria, we have oil, we have gas. There are some countries with no oil, no gas. Okay. But we have light, we have sunlight. So that's where renewable energy comes in. When we talk about energy mix, we talk about the renewable and we talk about the fossil, right? And we talk about coal. So that's where renewable energy mix comes in. So those areas where we do not have access to maybe gas, that we can have electricity, but we have solar. So these will actually help reliable, electricity power to women in those rural areas, those areas where they can't get light, and it will also help, that will actually reduce mortality. How will it reduce mortality? It provides reliable and accessible energy, because you can't take sunlight away from you can't take sunlight away from anybody. It doesn't cost. What will cost is the equipment you need for renewable, for the solar panel and the others. So we will encouraging more companies or more investors to actually invest in renewable, especially in those areas where we actually see that they don't have access to power, and more women. Unfortunately, women, like you said, I don't want to say victims, but women and children are the ones that are less privileged to actually have electricity and more affected. So we will. It is very important to have more investors go in on renewable, especially in those rural areas where women don't have access to electricity.
Thank you. So just to round up in 30 seconds, Amena, I would like to just get your closing remarks on how governments can invest more in women and accelerate progress for a sustainable energy future. Just in 30 seconds.
Sure. When it comes to women or men, in fact, as I mentioned, that women perhaps need a little bit of a boost in some of the societies that they've been kind of left behind. So three things: education, education, education. I mean, the government, companies need to invest in the education and training of women to kind of boost their career further. I'm a big believer in education, and that's what carries you forward. And that's what many women need help with. So whether it's to provide the financial support, the groups, to provide programs that would help these women enter into various sectors, that's kind of the base where we're at. In terms of, the energy sector, we need to look at energy now more holistically. We know that energy demand is going to be rising, and we need to look at this energy transition not just as a transition, as an addition, meaning that all forms of energy will be needed in the future. You need oil and gas, you need renewables, you need nuclear power. So we need a higher workforce to be employed in all of these sectors, and women can play a big role in doing that. So that's where I see, the role of women could be expanded, not just in the upstream traditional oil and gas sector, but just having women employed by the energy sector at large.
Right. Dr. Victoria?
Thank you very much. So in my concluding remarks, I believe that women have lots of opportunities in the energy sector and in the extractive industries. So let us not limit ourselves. We know the obstacles. Let us work on ensuring that we get rid of the obstacles. But also, most importantly, as a woman, like I already mentioned, you don't need to be entitled. Get the necessary expertise, get the necessary skills. Let us be aggressive like the men, because also these sectors are very competitive. We have to be aggressive. We have to be willing to take up new challenges. It's no longer business as usual where you sit and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with being a secretary. I'm comfortable with being a researcher. No, let us dream big. We want to be CEOs, but no one is going to respect an incompetent CEO.
Thank you. Grace?
Yeah, I believe the women should be part of the African dialogue, African narrative in terms of energy transition. As I think Amina mentioned earlier, energy transition is not just about renewables. It's not about leaving traditional fossil, and moving to renewable. But energy transition is, for me, is energy mix. I mentioned earlier that countries with no gas, no oil, but they are good. They have sunlight. So energy transition, women should sit on the table of the African dialogue on anything as energy transition. We cannot be left behind, and we should not sit on the table as women. We should sit on the table as professionals, as leaders.
It's been a huge learning experience just listening to you ladies. I wish we wouldn't have to stop, but this is where we call it a day. Thank you so much for sharing such insightful thoughts on women's role in Africa's sustainable energy future as we continue to remain optimistic about changes to come. I hear you all, ladies, and we hope that this message goes out to relevant stakeholders and people who need to hear it. And that's it on our Energy Quick Chat. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to watch. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe to see more videos like this, and follow Frontier Africa Reports across all our social media handles. I am Justina Okechukwu. Bye for now.